talked about most recently so that I'm up to speed.
Well,
We were
we've
talking
been
about
talking a
Urbit
lot.
becoming Jewish, a Jewish only
Well,
dating
you're
service.
I just baited you in, which is a perfect
Oh, good.
a perfect moment. Yeah, Irvin as J-Date is my
Day date for hackers.
Oh, I'm absolutely in for that.
I have like a real attachment to there existing both extremes of everything, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, we have 8chan, we have 4chan. Like, we need the opposite of these things also. It's like we must keep the world in balance, basically. Um,
I
we've
was
also been
just
talking a
hearing
lot
someone
about
else
personal AI
talking.
stuff.
Wait, is this my computer or is somebody else? Can
It's
everyone else
actually
hear
the
this?
plate, it's the metal plate.
It's
No, I can't. I can't. No, I can't hear
Dex, what are you experiencing right now?
um someone narrating a video. I'm trying to find, maybe I have something open on my computer, but you guys weren't all hearing that.
What are
you.
the voices telling you? Please share it.
No. Yeah, that's the right jumping off point for the conversation. Uh,
Yeah, what transmission are you receiving?
Also, I always forget to like, I can't possibly, it's so impossible to me to like juggle chat at the same
Where
time.
do
Both these things
where do
going.
folks typically chat when they're watching?
What? What? Oh, we lost him. Oh, wow. Now you're like,
It's just me.
you should see the way that the video is cropped. Looks amazing. It's like splitting you across two frames. That's so cool.
I'm super down for that.
I
Um,
might just leave that because it also reveals how naive and stupid my OBS setup is.
Okay.
There we go.
All
Dexter's
right.
back.
Yeah, that was very, very funny. I have no idea what was going on, but I think it was Petra Court, right? I heard like there was some like weird video
Perfect.
playing in some tab that I couldn't see, and it was like Petra describing some art project, which like but very quietly, and it sounded like it was coming from one of your rooms. Like
She's like the
so I
right.
think
It makes sense, you know. She's just a part of the conversation, you know.
yeah,
Uh,
Petra's like a native arbiter, correct?
yeah, to some extent.
I
She's
mean,
definitely a
that's a great
friend.
place to start, which is aren't we all native arbiters at heart? Like, don't we all just are
We
native
all
arbiters?
belong on Urbit. Yeah, I think so.
I
Uh,
mean, definitely, I definitely feel a kinship to it. It was like the my first intro to Urbit being the introducing Urbit blog post that Galen wrote, which is probably one of my favorite pieces of writing the modern internet. And yeah, I was fully pilled back in like what
That's high praise.
2016.
Wait, that's
What about
the
blog
series
posts?
one, the one that was
The
like a bunch of them.
megacorp. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like the
yeah, yeah.
first like the initial like yeah megacorp sort of like explanation, I was like, oh, these people understand like all of the things that I think about all the time and like think no one takes seriously.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, that was sort of how I felt when I found Urbit myself in some ways. That post took me so long. I still find writing really painful. It's like really important, but really painful. And that post, which I really want, eventually got, I'm sure it still exists somewhere on the internet, but like got concise enough, I think. Like, man, oof, there are a lot of drafts of that. It was painful. Writing is so
This
Has
painful to me.
has writing gotten less easy, more easy, or net same since that post when you're
I
talking about
actually do
Urbit?
think I've gotten like much better at it. I don't know if well, I talked about this on the last episode, someone was making fun of me for it, but like, I've always, I think as Tlon has become like more of a thing, or you know, as maybe it's like more like as Urbit has become more of a this, it's infrastructure, it's technology, it's very much like an open source thing. That's a huge like relief to me because there's
Mhm.
always been this sense of like who's the Vitalik, who's the Linus, who's the and I think that never, it's like, I don't think that ever really sat right with Curtis. Like, I don't think it certainly didn't sit right. Like, I'm like, Urbit is just technology, okay? Really great technology, just it's like out there. It's not, there isn't a person. I don't know why people want that. But Tlon is a company, okay? We make stuff, and I am happy I can speak to that, and we make stuff on top of Urbit for good reason. I think Urbit is great. I can talk about why I think Urbit is great, but to be the sole representative of Urbit was always like that's maybe probably part of why that was stuff was like painful because I was like I don't know like Urbit's like, it's in the sort. I'm like, you read the sort. You want to know what Urbit is? Like, it's actually not that hard to understand. It's just like a simple, it's actually
It
a
fits
pretty
on a
simple piece
t-shirt.
of technology. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
it's
simple. Everyone's
it's
always
like
so
trying to
mystified by it. I'm like,
into like answer for all of mathematics. It's like, no, I'm working on a piece of mathematics. I've got some theories, but like, I'm not the arbiter of all things that matter in math.
yeah, well, certainly, like that's, I mean, it's an open source project. Like, I don't get to like, I don't have like unilateral rights to the repo or something. Like, I don't get to change the source code. Like, who cares what I think about what I think about Urbit is like just like in my opinion of this thing, basically. Like, it's like it's just a thing that's out there. But now it's
I mean,
finally is kind of a thing, you know, like it's its own thing. Like, there's a whole community that manages it. That's how it should be.
yeah, that's not dissimilar to FWB. I feel like I mean, I go places and like, like in different crowds, people either like praise or like rail on me for like what FWB is doing or not doing or what it is or what it isn't or what they think it is. And it's always funny to see people like understand like when I'm like, like I agree with you or disagree with you, but also like you're not hurting my feelings by saying this stuff because it very much is like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about a world that we all live in and like, the better we do at our jobs, like the less we matter to that sort of big picture, right? It's like it should be
Sure,
about what
yeah, it's
everybody
like an
else is doing anyways.
organism.
It shouldn't, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you
That's
think,
interesting.
Dex, that you're closer to a point at which people care less about figureheads for FWB, or do you still feel like you get that kind of treatment you're describing when people realize, what you co-founded?
Yeah, well, I think that like figureheads serve their place in certain things. Like, I always prefer for figureheads to like be domain specific and not like, lord over like, we're talking about here, like lord over Urbit as like, a piece of open source technology. Like that would sort of go against some of the core tenets of this stuff. But I do think I like the idea of people like and organizations like Tlon existing where you do have like a figurehead, who if Galen starts screwing up really bad, you can sort of chop his head off and put someone else new in there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've always been like on the other side of that, where like figureheads of FWB have been like, funny. It's like, Alex, our mayor, exists, and then we have community people who do a lot of stuff. And so like at any given point, I feel like a lot of people have different ideas of like who's doing what and who's running things, and that's like, to be expected. People want a figurehead, they like want to know who did it and who to like apply all of the like either like, negative or positive feelings towards. But yeah, I don't know how much it actually means.
It's funny because you're making me realize how little I know actually about like FWB. I mean, period. But like I know people, obviously. That's like my primary connection to FWB is just through knowing people involved in FWB. And I know a little bit of the history, like kind of, but pretty peripherally. But to me, like the insight of FWB, which I always thought was like really brilliant, was the idea that you could, we've all, and I think actually I've like all of us literally have like been a part of significant online communities over the years, which like have had a significant impact on the way you think or who you're connected to, or you have lasting relationships that come out of them. And so the simple act of saying, and actually in a kind of funny way, I always felt like I thought the token was kind of funny. Like I thought it was a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it was a joke, but I thought it
Yeah,
was
I mean, it
funny.
started as like, yes, like a bit of like a weekend kind of like fuck around and just see what happens type of thing. It was definitely
Yeah, yeah,
not a
that's
serious
perfect.
like
Yeah. But it's
plan.
also real in that it enshrines this thing, right? It's like it just says, no, no, okay, but we're gonna make it like kind of permanent in a
Hmm.
particular fashion. And there's something, obviously a bunch of other things flow out of that. But I think that choice alone is like actually quite is really brilliant and really unique, I guess, because mostly online communities are totally ephemeral. They're basically ultimately ephemeral, And now
Yes.
it's ultra.
Yeah.
Most of the platforms you create them on, Twitter or whatever, they're so ephemeral to me. It's probably part of why I don't participate in that stuff because it feels like they just kind of come and go and disappear, and there's no structure to them at all. Um, anyway, yeah, I don't know if that does that's but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
okay,
mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I've always like liked that idea because like, essentially scenes, we've all been a part of like, like IRL and URL, like sort of like scenes, communities, message boards, whatever it is. And they are ephemeral. And like, like physical real life scenes. Like I grew up in like a punk scene in Chicago, playing crust punk music with a bunch of kids in like a network of garages. And like that was the closest thing that FWB sort of reminded me of, is like people like there was a list that got passed around through maybe just the Midwest, but I think it was pretty national, where it was like bands would tour and there was like a venue and we would set up like a friend had a show every weekend, and bands just knew that there was a show and they would sort of like send an email or call someone and then they'd be playing there. And it's just like this big list of places, like DIY sort of garages and basements you could play and crash at. And it was just sort of like whoever showed up that weekend was playing and we had a show. And it was like it created this sort of like, it was very ephemeral, but it was a like, you know, semi-decentralized network of people who were all in for the same shit and didn't like care so much about like the yeah, it was just about community, right? It was about this, like you were playing with some of your favorite punk bands, but it was like your shitty punk band that you started in, you know, 2 weeks prior with scraps of other bands that had just broken up in your area and stuff like that. And like FWB has always felt like that. Like it's more of a, it's like that list of garages. And like there could be no one using it.
But the cool thing about that is that the garages are reasonably permanent,
Yes.
or they're, you know what I mean? Like there's this through line of, yeah, definitely all those. I think of like all the like punk venues that I grew up going to, you know, and a lot of them
Yeah.
still exist actually. But the continuity of just like literally, it's just a space, like it's just a void. That some of them are so. I remember even as a kid thinking like, why did they let us do this here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it makes no sense. I don't know. It's actually very generous. It would be funny to find out like who is. It's like the Shea in San Diego, or like the Smell, or these like,
Yeah.
like they're just horrible places. Like kind
The
of like,
cocaine.
I frequently
gross
like
and loud.
EFW halls and church basements in the tri-state area in New York, and it's like, why are we allowed to do this here? But fuck it, like we're gonna do it anyway.
Well, yeah, being an adult now, though, there was some adult who was like, let's just let them have fun or whatever. But the fact of that as like a place is so important, right? That like everyone kind of goes back to it. You like look at there's like you're looking at shows like in this place, you know?
Yeah. It was
like
just
you
like
always
the
know it's gonna
Fireside
happen
Bowl.
there.
The Fireside in Chicago was like that spot for me, where it's like it's a bowling alley. They let punk shows happen, but like it was always in the process of like getting either like shut down for like, you know, like sort of building violations because the ceiling was falling down, or they just were making more money like letting people bowl there, so they would just like stop doing shows. And then for a while it was like both. It would be like, you know, like crazy punk, like Leftover Crack would be playing and there'd be like 40 people bowling right next to it and kids like beating the shit out of each other. And it's like, yeah, there are real heroes of that era who like kept those things like going and kept them alive and like made space for that. And that's like in the digital world, I do feel like that's like that was something that's sort of missing. There aren't like, you know, Urbit felt like that. It feels like there's, you know, regardless of like the aesthetics, there's like a bit of a punk ethos behind it, just being like, do it yourself. You know, like you can, it's not that hard. And like, here is why you would want to do it yourself. And like, you know, you'll be here with a bunch of other people who are also doing that, which is, you know, that's a specific community.
That was Asher at Assembly. I don't remember what we were talking about. I think I was talking to him about how I always felt like he was so good with Sex Mag of like finding the people who are kind of like, it's almost like he could just like walk through a city and be like, oh, that's the punk house. Like, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to talk to the most interesting person there. And I was like, and I think I was saying something like, yeah, I feel like that's actually just really hard to do on the internet. Like, it's like, how do you find it? He's like, well, no, like Urbit is kind of like the punk house.
Yeah.
And I was like, really?
Well, I thought it was really funny. Like I thought it was really funny when we started talking initially, because I had always assumed that like Urbit's sort of like barrier of entry, this sort of like, you know, like, I mean, I got onto Urbit early, like 2016, like right before OS1 came out. And so it was like pretty hairy getting like your ship loaded and stuff like that. It took me like a couple days and I got it up, and like at the end of it, I was like, oh, these people are geniuses, because like you wind up with only highly motivated people who like understand what's going on and were willing to like run through a thorn bush to get in. And that group of people is actually a great group of people to start out with. And FWB was like semi-similar, because we were actually like, you know, like we focus less on the sort of like deep hacker kind of like tech mindset and more on this like, you know, social, cultural, creative side. And those people
Yeah.
just don't like, they weren't, technology was not a big part of like how they were interacting with like the structure of whatever industry they were in, whether you're an artist or a musician or like a tastemaker or anything. Like blogging and like the internet was, but not like tools. And so like, yeah, getting people into FWB was that basically. It's like, no, you have to download a MetaMask wallet. Now you have to buy Ethereum. And then you have to go to Uniswap and you have to swap this for a token that's going to tell you that it's like not on any token list and it's like not a good thing to buy. And there's a big red warning sign. And like getting people over those humps at the start was like very much that. And you wound up with a lot of people who just didn't do it, you know, who were like texting me 8 months later when our token was at a nice price, being like, what did I do? I fucked up. And like, you know, a bunch of other people whose lives had changed because they like spent 24 hours doing this weird thing one day. And now they like are part of a network that's like, you know, somewhat meaningful in their lives. But it is like I actually like those. Like I like those filters on the way into, you know, groups that like maybe aren't necessarily exclusive, but like yeah, that, you know, I don't even want to say like gatekeep, but just have a gate of some kind to
Yeah,
get through
just
because
some kind of,
everything is very open. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
no, just like some kind of friction that makes it so that you, like you said, Dex, there's like a level of commitment required to seeing it through from hearing about the thing to getting into the thing to then like actually figuring out whether or not it's for you, which I think mimics a lot of what like it feels like when you're participating in scenes in real life, which is like you see a thing that seems kind of curious and interesting, you like work up the energy or courage or whatever is required to get you to actually like interact with it, whether it's like actually going to a show at the venue or actually going into like that one random record store. And then you have that weird feeling that I think is common for most people, despite most people not talking about it, which is like, do I belong here? Is this for me? Like, am I going to be accepted, etc.? And I think like, I know that I felt that when I first joined FWB, which was, you know, similar to what you just said. A good friend of mine who knew that I was like pretty savvy about crypto told me about it. I went and did what I had to do. I joined, and like the first three intros that I saw on the intro channel were like semi to very famous people who I very much felt like I should not be in the same group chat as. And so that took me a while to work up the like courage required to introduce myself. And once I did, I was like, oh, there's people in here that I've known from past communities that I've like belonged to or helped run. And I like it felt like home. And similar to like my first experience with Urbit, was this like moment of like, all right, I figured this shit out. My head hurts. What do I do now? And like inside the first like Tlon public group that I went into, was like, oh, I know some of these folks, or I follow them on Twitter, or like I've met them at other events. And so the purpose, I think, of that filter that you're talking about isn't a traditional sort of like gatekeeping people out for any sort of negative reason. It's really just that it allows you to go through that same level of like building up that connection to something because you were committed enough to find out that it was your place that you needed to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have such a conflicted relationship with the like the gatekeeping of being able to be on Urbit has like never been intentional at all. It's like the almost like the opposite. It's like this thing. I think everyone who worked on Urbit was like, yeah, we hate this. We don't want this to be true. Like, sure, we want communities to be able to set up their own criteria for participation. That's kind of the whole point. Where like, hey, every community can set up its own rules. Um, you're right that that gatekeeping for certain communities is really important, but it's such a funny thing just historically because I've always found it like, and I've actually always hated it about like I agree that it did good, it's worked well, and I love the people who have become such a part of the like it worked out, but it was like
Yeah.
totally unintentional. It's like actually totally in some ways the reverse, like the FWB like token gating mechanism, right? It's like a very intentional thing. Um, we're like the opposite where we're like we don't, this just exists because it's a ambitious technical project and we haven't quite gotten to the, I mean now it's obviously gotten a lot easier, but like for many years it was like, oh, we just haven't, it's like fixing onboarding is going to be really hard. Obviously it really was, like took us years to like actually get all the way there. But in some ways that can work, obviously can work too, right? Like you have this kind of like accidental barriers to entry. I was talking to Philip about this the other day. I don't remember exactly what context. I think I told you about this too. Like I was talking about this kind of core use case for landscape of like, hey, you want to build a community that has some boundary around it. And Philip was like, well, that's not really a thing for me. I don't really care about communities like that. And Philip comes from like totally different background, and I was like, that's not true. Like you're a part, you're like a part of. What do you mean? Like your whole life centers around this one. And he was
Right.
like, oh yeah, that's kind of true. And actually, when I think about the other communities I'm a part of, like most of them actually, they just don't have a barrier to entry. It's just that like if you want to be a part of it, you just are. Like,
What's an example of that?
oh, I think it's like for Philip, it was like homeschooling. It's like he grew up in a homeschooling community, and like, or like he was homeschooled, and like the homeschooling community is really important.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you're homeschooling, that's like a big part of your what, like that's you're
Yeah,
just in there, you know. No
I would,
one's
I would,
keeping you
I would,
out. It's like if
I
you
would
want to do
argue
it, you do
though.
it.
I mean, I would argue though, and this kind of informs a lot of the thinking that I do about communities and building tools for communities. It's like there's a pretty high barrier to entry there. It's having a kid and having a partner who also agrees
Yeah,
with you that you should be homeschooling. And then it's like choosing a curriculum and deciding what curriculum to use. It's like actually a pretty
totally,
high barrier to entry, right?
totally.
I think folks, it's very easy, and I think it's like a output of sort of like the Web 2 commodification of community that like we assume that there are spaces or even digital spaces you can belong to that don't require you to like meet some prerequisites in order to participate. I'm actually much more in favor of taking like a really deep anthropological view of what it means to be in a community, which is like there's always a thing that you have to do to belong. And even though it
Yeah.
might seem like it's a natural thing that you're just happening to do, thinking about those parts concretely is actually what makes communities really healthy, in my opinion.
Well, what was interesting to me about the conversation though is that I think in some cases, and actually I think in many cases, people like whether or not what you're saying is true, for most people those boundaries are invisible. They don't
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
at all about the existence of the boundary. And actually, I think for Philip, I think it is fair. Like a lot of those the sort of really like overt, and I don't think this is just Philip. I think there are like a lot of people, even internal to the company, who feel this way, and I understand why they would. They're like overtly creating boundaries, like contriving them is like incredibly pretentious. And in some ways,
Mhm.
like very simply, I would say, yeah, they're right. It is pretentious.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a habit of a particular sort of faction of society, but it doesn't mean that those boundaries don't exist in other communities also. It's
Yeah.
like such an interesting distinction. Um,
I mean, there's like versions of it, right? Like there's gatekeeping or exclusivity, and this is something I like a lot, and I think I've yelled at you a lot about this over text, Galen. But like the idea that like there's different forms of that, and some communities or scenes or ideas are kind of like self-policing or self-protective. My favorite of which being like the Insane Clown Posse, like that
yeah,
community. If you want to be a juggalo,
Whoop,
you don't have
whoop.
to ask permission. Woo woo. Uh, you don't need to ask permission. It's a permissionless place. There are like it's a very clear form of membership. I mean, like if you're a part of the community, you can be casual. You can look like any of us on this call, or you can like put on like fucking clown makeup every day and like be like in it. And like that actual step is solely what we're talking about, right? It's the monk. Like if you're a true juggler, if you're putting on face paint every day, like you're a monk of this scene. You're essentially like one of the core keepers of the identity and the idea. And it has such a like the signal of this community is such that everyone like will touch it at some point in their lives almost. Like if you're living in America, you will understand probably what a juggalo is at some point, which is so weird to me because like you might never hear a single song by Insane Clown Posse in your entire life, but you will know these people and you'll have an idea of whether or not it's something you're interested in. Like you'll know right off the bat, is this me or is this not me? And like, I know my
right, yeah.
answers to that question. Other
It's
people
a
do too. And
hearty
so
yes.
and so
Yes.
like homeschooling to me is a very similar thing, right? It's like
Yeah.
I like you don't actually have to go through hoops because like if you're looking for this community, you're in the right place.
Well, it
And
also
like
may be like a part of your, like just where you're from, where your family, like it's kind of a natural consequence of where you grew
Yeah.
up or whatever, right? And like I think the the thing that it's just like that, yeah, there are all these different, there's this whole spectrum of ways in which a community kind of declares its own values and sort of proactively gatekeeps or does not proactively gatekeep. I think the way I think about it is like you just want people to have the tools to do that and to do you can do that, yeah, you can I feel like this is one of the things actually I notice about, I'm not on Mastodon, but like what I notice about Mastodon world is that like there's this, so with digital communities generally, it seems like one of the most common things is to kind of gatekeep, right? It's like, because anyone can go anywhere. And so like, if you want to have a high quality conversation, you kind of, either you're doing it in private or you have some criteria for entry. But then there are certain kinds of communities, certainly like kind of like science and math and computer science and stuff, where it's like, it's very much like they have this declared value of openness. It's like, hey, anyone can come and participate. Actually, there really are like rules to the conversation, the way that you want to conduct yourself and so on. And so it's like, it's almost like this very confusing thing where the value is the door must be open, anyone can enter, but actually you have to play by these rules, but anyone can come in at any time. And then like those communities are really successful. Actually, I would say like Reddit, Hacker News, like Mastodon seems to be like there's like some
Yeah.
weird structural thing that's shared across all of these platforms that are actually very self-regulating. Like there is a tone to them, there's a style to them, there's like a way of being. But of course, yeah, anyone can create an account. You can just go and join. It's confusing.
But like
Thing.
there is something, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Like I don't know if it happens anymore, but there is like a remarkable lack of emojis on Reddit. And I like at a point like 5-6 years ago, I used to see people get like nagged for using emojis on Reddit for like leaving a comment that's just like a laughing emoji. And it's sort of informed like the whole thing, right?
Reddit truly mystifies me. I'm still like,
So
I mean,
crazy.
it's so fascinating. I may need to spend more time within,
Reddit's,
there's,
yeah.
It's like it's 4chan basically, right? It's like a packaged version of 4chan without images. And like this is something me and Jose talk about a lot in terms of like FWP and like with our product team and the app that we're making and stuff like that. That like for some communities like sort of what you're talking, like we're talking about different things. Like where you're talking about like a community who's processing information. Like FWB I look at as like basically like this hive mind that is continuously like coming to consensus about what we're dealing with at the present. Like, if you go into any channel, there's the latest conversations are people just trying to figure out what the fuck is happening in like trading, like in, on the markets, if they're trading in NFTs, if they're like, looking at this stuff in music, whatever it is, it's like people don't go there to just like have a conversation about how great like, Burial was or something, in general. It's like, it's actually like it's discovery basically. And so to be able to do that and to be able to like actually like expose yourself to like a live feed of that or like a group kind of all just conceding on information every single day and just processing it and then it just gets wiped clean is a very like it's different than Twitter. It's different than even like forums for a lot of like parts. I don't know. Reddit is mystifying to me as well. But I
One
think that
thing
a lot of different networks could benefit from that kind of like ephemeral, like leaning into the ephemerality of that without deleting
One
stuff.
thing about Reddit that's interesting is I had a conversation with one of their product leads a while ago. Recently, I think Dex, I told you about this, but like they view Reddit as a community platform and not a social platform, and they have like a very narrow definition of like what community means and what social means.
Mm.
And the simplest way of thinking of it is like a social technology or social platform is really about fostering connections to other people and the connections that you build with those people over time. And to them, a community is kind of along the lines of what you were both just talking about, which is like, I go to the Reddit page for the Juggalo community and I click join, and now I have this like never-ending stream of content created by other people who are in the Juggalo community who may or may not be actual juggalos, right? There's
it's like an abstraction. It's like you're there for the abstraction of the thing.
Yeah. And then what Reddit feels like they nailed and what allowed them to scale and grow, which I think is really fascinating, is the quality of the information you see when you open up that pipe at any given point in time might genuinely just be garbage. And so what they had to build was a system that surfaces like quality conversations from within these communities. And that's what they feel like is their actual like core product.
Okay, I think I hate that.
Wait, tell us more. Why do you hate that?
Well, so maybe like winding the conversation back a little bit. So the first thing I felt like we were talking about, which resonates for me, is this in what I think is basically like kind of the idea of place. So a community needs a place. So if you're a punk scene, there has to be like this cohesion, consistency, like has to be a consistent place. You have to feel like there is a place that we go to. And that's really tough on the internet generally. So I think some of the overlap, like the reason that we are all friends basically is because that's like there's shared interest there, right? It's like acknowledged that, yeah, it really is important. Like community has to feel ownership over that place. They have to feel like they can be somewhere. And then there's like a shared set of values. And that shared set of values is what should be the top level thing that from which all of the tools that that community uses, either gets picked or gets created. And I think so to me, like there's the stuff that we make comes from the sort of primacy of like, hey, you should empower people to either select or create those tools like freely, rapidly, like create their own boundaries, like create their own place. And like when you let people do that, like unexpected, interesting things will happen. People will figure out new ways of relating to each other, or they will enshrine, old ways, ancient ways of relating to each other, and they can have continuity. Which is such a, I mean, communities like the stories that we tell ourselves, the way our culture is, whatever, is like a byproduct of like these threads of community. And the idea that an algorithm could tell you what's important in a community is like, that's like a complete like category violation to me. I'm just like, no, you don't understand. A community is about people holding that idea is not software. Like the tool is downstream from the community being able to, it changes over time, and we figure out how to make it physical over time. But like a company doesn't do that. Are you fucking kidding me? You think Reddit, the company, can tell me what's the most important thing in my community? I just like, that just grates me. Like I'm like, no, that's ridiculous.
I mean, I'm with you on that for sure. The sort of idea, like, I mean, like, I look at communities very like abstractly as like what you're talking about, like essentially protectors of an idea. Like when there's an idea that's good enough that comes into the world, whether that's like the idea of a juggalo or the idea of Urbit or something like that, I judge like the sort of merit or the value of that idea by like how many people it can like engage to come like sort of orbit it, and like the strength of its gravity to sort of pull people in to both like protect it, service it, and like extend it into the real world. So like for Urbit that involves writing code, for for FWB that's like involves like essentially just like setting up any structure that we can put people in after they agree that like they're like they purchased a token, they decided this is something for them. But the idea at its core is like the thing that can't be forgotten about, right? Like this is the thing that you're protecting. And like my issue with a lot of current social, like I guess tooling and like community tooling and stuff like that, is that it very much like prioritizes attention over like actual value of stuff, which is sort of like what I guess Reddit would be doing, right? Like they're basing the entire value off of like what goes at the top of a subreddit by like probably how many views, upvotes, comments it gets like in a short amount of time. And then you're always racing against a clock that's probably like eating away at those points, and you have to earn more at a a quicker rate to keep yourself up at the top of the list. It's like a game, right? Like these are like very like it's more like physics than it is anything else. They just like sort of implemented a very sort of rigid algorithm. Now like that's fine, I guess, but like I think like I'm averse to that to some extent, but it works whatever at grand scale. If you're putting one algorithm in charge of every single community on your thing, I get why like they're doing it that way. But I do think that like going into the future, these communities all have a lot more power than they think. I mean, you're actually seeing it right now. You're seeing like Reddit subreddits right now like are going dark, and they're turning off, like they're going private so that Reddit becomes ostensibly less valuable to like as an API endpoint, because they're raising their prices. Like that stuff's all super interesting to me, where like the communities who are making up the value of Reddit are actually starting to like kind of push back and say the same thing. Like if you're going to sell us all out for a lot of money, we're going to go dark on you. And to me, that's like an actual like understanding that there's a difference between the idea that the subreddit was created for and just the subreddit in general, right? Like it's more like archetypes that are surfaced on this website than they are like things that were created on the website, if that makes sense.
All right, so how do we get all those communities onto Urbit?
Well,
How do
first
we,
we make
vampire attack Reddit and take all the subreddits that are angry at their recent API changes?
it's actually surprising. I mean, it's not, you want to know like the operational answer, or you want to know the I'd say, I mean, the interesting overlap here, right, is like this idea that, yeah, like it's like communities should own their tools, like tools should not own their communities, basically. And
Yep.
every tool that owns the community is going to go away ultimately, because no community can actually survive being owned by their tool. Like, you will
Right.
eventually be exploited for data or money or something, like,
Yeah.
because that tool has to make a graph go up and to the right, and they're going to take advantage of you somehow. Like, it's just the most natural, it's like a law of nature. Like, it's not even a bad thing, it's just reality. Um, I think, and so that shift, broadly speaking, I would say happens partially because people get sick of being taken advantage of for a variety of different reasons. And then also because, yeah, as we become more mature and more organized and more like, and urban landscape becomes more capable, we actually just go after them. So in the Reddit case, like, you could do things like basically say, hey, OAuth with your Reddit account, and we'll give you a planet, and we'll scrape all your data back. And you could do all kinds of interesting things by just like saying, hey, we're just going to scrape your data back into an Urbit node. That's an engineering effort that we are totally not prepared to take on, but it's actually not that it's not that difficult to imagine. I mean, we've talked about, what's that?
The Great Migration would be a nice little campaign.
Isn't that,
Yeah, exactly.
was the first Great Migration from Dig to Reddit? I think that was like Reddit actually like exists
Oh.
because Dig fucked something up back in the day, and there was like this moment where people used to use Dig like religiously. And who created Dig again? Was that
I don't remember, but
was
yeah,
that someone?
that's
That's someone from our circle. But yeah, and I believe that was like a big migration was Dig to Reddit. And then yeah, it was its predecessor.
Well, the one we've thought about is Discord, obviously, right? That's like part of like
Sure.
because so many of our friends are kind of like trapped on Discord, and then you sort of see you do cool stuff on Discord, but also you see the limits of Discord, and you're like, okay, people got to be able to get more creative. Like, this is
Yeah.
stupid.
Oh wait, I just did a quick Google, and literally they did a relaunch that didn't port over any of the content or votes or
Yes.
things that people had done
Yeah, they erased the
like
history.
years. That's actually fucking amazing. I
Yeah,
forgot
they just like
about this.
erased communities like entire histories, and we're like, but it looks better, right? You don't care about that shit. And everyone was just like, fuck you.
Holy shit, that's
Yeah,
insane.
But it's like
understandable.
I mean it's a real testament to the fact that like this stuff happens, and it also makes sense as to why Reddit has not. Oh, Kevin Rose was the founder of Dig.
Yeah,
That's what it
that's
is. Moonbirds. Yeah, and proof. But yeah, it's a testament to the fact that communities will go elsewhere, and like that's sort of like, I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to happen to Reddit. I think that they captured a certain like type of person that they've like designed a type of person almost like Reddit has sort of like turned people into this sort of like homogenized version of themselves that like, yeah, it has a flavor. But like, I don't know, I'm like very much I'm like looking to like build things, and also like looking for things that allow for like easy, like, all right, this is gonna sound a little controversial, but like radical groups, extremist groups, and stuff like that. They take an idea. This is the same thing, right? Like ISIS is a scene, like the Juggalos are a scene, like FWB is a scene. It's digital marketing and a framing of the world, but like, all right, I keep forgetting that we're like live, and I can't just talk about ISIS
Go for it.
for,
You guys
Tell you what,
are
tell you what.
but like if you look at what they like, the extremity of the things they're able to accomplish, the actual like the energy that they've gotten out of the people who buy into what they're providing. What you have is like people who've given their entire lives to a cause, to an idea, and you see people do this across the board. And I think that like, in 5 years everything is actually going to take the form of something like far more like, it looks far more like that than it looks like a Reddit, like a subreddit, because there's ideas around that are powerful enough to like upend large parts of society. People are like kind of getting on to those ideas and starting to see that they can push back in the world and it like makes a difference. And like extreme ideologies, like they're able to generate extreme sort of capable idealists who will go like, you know, throw themselves in the fire for these ideas. Less extreme ideas have a problem where like no matter how important they are to the world, it's very hard to generate and keep idealists, like people who are going to protect this idea and see it through to the future without like handing it over to, you know, the types of people who show up when an idea turns into like a popular idea. You know, that's where like gatekeeping and exclusivity I actually think gets important, isn't when like you're starting out, but like when the world decides that you're either doing something good or bad. um like it's going to involve a lot of dilution with your idea, and if you don't have the structure and the tools and the people around to protect your idea, it's going to get co-opted, and basically, you know, like it will get diluted to the point where it's no longer powerful enough to keep anyone around. And I
Is
think a
that?
lot of that has to do with tools.
I think you're broadly onto something important, but there's a couple of things. So one thing I observe actually, well, I don't follow ISIS super closely, but last I checked, they weren't doing super well, which was
Correct, yeah.
actually a reflection of what seems to me to be actually kind of a rule of thumb, which is that really truly extremist, like sort of ways of thinking, cults, whatever they are tend to be really unstable because they attract really extreme and unstable people.
Yeah.
But there's a kind of Goldilocks, like, you know, level of ideology which can really work, and sometimes you see that in the American political sphere, but you also see it obviously with you know, long running religious groups, right?
Yeah.
Like where they kind of gatekeep, but actually like they can be extremely you know, like truly productive and care for people really really successfully. um, and I think that's like but there obviously there is not one, right? There are many of them, and they have
Yeah.
different ideas. Getting attacked by a fly. Uh, and I think, you know, one of the oldest, in a way, like American ideas, right, is that we're like, yeah, that's a good thing. Like, we want there to be a lot of competing images or like sort of views of the world, ways of thinking about the world. We just want those things to coexist. And we want people to compete in a way, in the way that you're talking about, I think, and just say, hey, you know what, go ahead, enroll as many people as you want or as few people as you want. And just like, we're just going to enshrine the idea that you should be able to start whatever faction you want and, you know, like build your coalition, and so long as it isn't an army and you're not killing anybody, like, we're cool with it. And I think that like that sort of like well, I think to your point, like I think that feels like, yeah, very suppressive, or like the internet accelerates our ability to do that, and that's a generally good thing. Like, you want to let people very rapidly assemble a community that's not geographically contiguous to explore an idea, to do something, whatever. And you want to enshrine the ability for those people to like do that in perpetuity, like not subject
Yeah.
to Reddit's terms of service or whatever.
And
And then,
possibly like make it a thing that they could survive off of to some extent. I mean, you know, I think that is where
yeah,
Reddit really misses it, is people are like, you know, there's moderators who spend their entire lives on this website making sure that these things are positive, but like no one's compensated for their input in any way, shape, or form besides like upvotes, which has miraculously like kept like the dream alive over there for a long time.
Yeah,
yeah,
people
yeah,
point. That's the one thing that I think is like funny about all this stuff is like, you know, we're talking about kind of things that we're all familiar with from both digital and real or physical communities, right? It's like infinite forkability. If you don't like the particular scene that you're in and you've got like 4 or 5 friends
yeah,
and you're like, fuck everyone, they're doing shit wrong, we're gonna go do the exact same thing somewhere else and tweak it slightly.
Yeah.
And platforms that encourage that, I think, are interesting, and Reddit to a certain extent will let you, you know, start a subreddit for the exact same subject. It's something that me and Dex talk a lot about for the FWB app, is sort of like, what would it look like for it to expand out of FWB? What is like facilitating the creation of a dark forest of social scenes look like? But I think that like the thing that's always interesting, this is something that we all talked about recently, is people do like a certain level of a game, right? People do like a certain level of there being like a feedback loop that makes them feel like they're not just having fun participating, but that they're quote unquote doing a good job at participating. And one of the examples I always use is this menswear forum that I used to moderate called Super Future that had this like very simple system called Plus Rep, where you had a certain number of points every day that you got to give out to other people based on the quality of their content. And this little tiny green bar under your username would just grow slowly over time. And people were like vicious defenders of their score. Like they would fight over who had the highest score. They would make merch out of their score. Like there are people with hats that had a tiny green bar on it. And it's just like the simplest, it's like the simplest system, but at the same time, I think what people want ultimately is not just belonging, but they do want status. And I think a lot of the systems that we've built like overblow what's necessary to make people feel like they've achieved something, but very simple mechanisms that allow people to kind of track their progress over time are really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's an important insight.
Like the status stuff, I think is huge. So I know, like with FWB, with what we talk about, I think it's big. And this is something I was texting Galen about like viciously the other day, where like essentially like status is this really funny thing where it's like, so it's a highly powerful resource. It's extremely valuable in our entire society. Like, you know, a high status individual in their scene, in their moment is unstoppable. Like you kind of like, there's superpowers that get afforded to you if you have status in a certain area. But it's also like it's an abundant resource. It's like it's infinite. You can give it out. You can create it out of thin air. Like, you know, this sort of like hikikomori culture of Japan has sort of like been a good example of that, where you have like the pool is too big. There are too many fish swimming in the pond. You know, you can't. You know, like the likelihood that you're going to become like influential to all culture in Japan is unlikely, but the ability to become highly influential in a small pocket of culture is actually like super easy, because like niche interests are highly embraced over there. And that's like very much become a whole part of the internet in the last decade, where like niche interests have taken over almost everything, right? Everyone you know is doing some weird thing or into some like weird thing that Instagram fed them, or, you know, the algorithm has actually like democratized niche, weird, esoteric interests. But the like ability to build status in those places is powerful, and it changes people's lives. Like, I mean, in the bull market of 2016, 17, when I was like, you know, for the first time, like doing weird things on BitMEX and making weird Martian trades and feeling like a genius for like a couple months, like I felt different. I walked around LA and I felt different. I didn't worry about like, you know, how good or bad my music career was going at the moment. I was, you know, like I was free of a lot of these insecurities, and I had a level of confidence that was completely like irrational, and
no one knew,
devastated.
right? Isn't that your
No,
point?
no.
Your point is,
Yeah,
no one knew.
no one knew.
There was no way for anyone to know. But
It changed my interaction with the world.
Yeah.
And that's like a gross example, because it's just like, oh my God, I finally like figured out a way to not like, you know, live in squalor for the rest of my life.
It's a good example, because I think it's not, the thing I was thinking is that like with the green bar is that one of the, I mean, I feel like we're all people who've like, you know, been, adjacent to music culture, fashion culture, art and creative, whatever, which is actually very outward, is very concerned with like outward status.
Yes.
And people playing against status and not, and you know, it gets complicated. It's ultimately probably a 20-year-old's game, but whatever, it's a game, and it's real. But I think the interesting thing is that in most communities, I think that those symbols of status are they're like not outward. They're like not even. It's like just the way that you get treated by your team, by your church community, by what, and like that like actually has such a material impact on your confidence, on your like, you know, sense of place in the world, whatever, and that you could quantify it, but you like even just be able to quantify it privately is really significant. Like you feel a sense of self-worth, and that like, it's an essential thing. Like I think
the door group on Urbit is huge. Like Romina's group Door and her mixes and stuff like those, like if you go to that group, like even just seeing you in there, like the first time I kind of like wound up in there, I was like, oh wow, Galen is like in here, like very, like engaging very heavily about these mixes that come out, and like it's this private little very special world where people like Romi's a bit of like an all-star in this world, and it's people like just bend a knee and like this, like Door is the best mix series of all time. like Door saves my life every time it comes out, all this stuff. And it's like, I don't actually know the listenership of Door.link. Everyone should go listen to Door.link and listen to these mixes. They're beautiful ambient mixes. But like that's an ideal form of status to me, is like people who are there who care so much about something someone's doing. Like local heroes are way more important to me than like influencers. Like I never wanted, like the kids want to be influencers, sure, but like when I was a kid, I didn't want to be like I didn't want to be Henry Rollins. I wanted to be like the kid who was 3 years older than me, who all of the girls that I liked. You know, like that was way more real to me than like trying to like get on stage and be in Black Flag or something like that. Like I just wanted a new experience with the world inside of this group, because these are the coolest people I knew. And like I think people forget that. Like I think they forget that like the coolest people everyone knows are like, you know, a couple like steps away for the most part, and have way more of an impact on most people's lives than like, you know, like getting to have lunch with like, you know, whatever, some influencer or something, or like or getting like a retweet by like, you know, a account that has 1 million followers or something. It's like those are fleeting, whereas an actual example of like this is what you could be, and this is someone who is this right here. I don't know. I see it happen in FWB. I see people who've crafted like very real, um, like it's not even like a persona. It's just they are who they are, and they're great. And FWB as a whole has like sort of conceded, like we've all come to a consensus that these are special people who do great things, and they're well respected inside the community, and their voice carries a lot of weight. And it's like that's actually like that's way more important than a lot of other things, I think, because there's not a lot of places you can do that.
That system that you're talking about, I think, is actually one of the most powerful things that proper communities do, which is like create mile markers for self-actualization, right? So like seeing someone else in that community who is maybe a little bit older, a little bit cooler, a little bit more interesting than you, like you start to model certain aspects of that behavior for yourself and inject it with your own perspective, and all of a sudden in due time, like you are the person who the next kind of generation is looking at and going like, oh my God, that person's so cool. Like I'll fully admit that like my version of what you just said, Dex, is that like for me being a teenager, I would go into other music in New York with trepidation because everyone who worked there was like the coolest fucking person on the planet. And like, I wanted to be the guy who was telling me to listen to Coil and Current 93.
Yeah.
And then I became that guy to other people. I think that that's a beautiful thing that digital communities can do, but they don't do often enough because they lean too much on this sort of like massive extrapolation of like, well, why would you have an audience of 30 when you can have an audience of 3 million? When that's the most inhumane thing possible.
They're just different. They're just totally different things, though. So I think like I kind of while you're talking about or we were talking about Reddit, I was sort of thinking like, oh, like the internet, the kind of mega platform internet is going to be like Europe, and then like Urbit world is basically like America or something like that, right? It's like you have like these enshrined value systems, these like old value systems. They're very like they're kind of they're very monarchical. They're very like they're algorithmic, whatever. It's like the king algorithm. And we're about something else, which is like no, we believe in this wide variety of factions that don't overlap, that don't even necessarily like each other. People do whatever they want. But I think you're just describing that in that world, like that is sometimes I think that basically like there was this like this very basic misunderstanding people had about what Facebook was for. So Facebook is actually a tool for you to become an influencer among as many. It's like it's basically Lord of the Flies, like for whoever wants to be the biggest influencer. It's a great product for that. It's like an unbelievably good product for that, right? But as we're discussing, right, it's like, but there are like the world is full of lots of communities that are in the size of, 10, 5 to 150 people or so. And those communities are not super high engagement. I mean, they're connected, but not necessarily engaged in the Facebook definition. They have their own rules about like what's acceptable, like in terms of content, in terms of conduct and so on. And they have, their own rituals, their own like ways of appreciating people, of structuring the way that they interact and so on. And like, that's ancient. Like those are community, like that's like a communal rights system, whatever, like, and that you can see it. And I do think like religious communities are like the simplest example, right? Because you see there can be, within Buddhism, it's like not only do you see this massive number of different Buddhist sects, but like any specific temple and then its local community, like they have their own like way of being, even if they, consider themselves to be, whatever, like a Rinzai in the specific lineage, but it's very
Yeah.
specific. I think that the world, I was thinking about this the other day where, yeah, I do think that, look, like, oh yeah, I spent, I didn't understand TikTok. Like 6 weeks ago, I was just like, I don't understand anything about this. Okay, I don't know, I haven't used it. And I was talking to my friend Emily, I think. I was trying to understand it from afar. I was like, she understands culture. I was like, Emily, explain TikTok to me. She's like, you gotta just use TikTok. I'm like, okay, fine. I guess it was like kind of I was like, man, I can't believe I'm gonna do this, but okay. Created like a just like random account and like spent like 3 weeks. I'd be like, all right, I'm just gonna look at TikTok every day for like 15 minutes just to like try and get a sense of it. And after like 4 weeks later, I was like, oh my God, this is TV. First I thought
Yeah.
it was going to be I was like, this is going to be something, maybe I'm really missing something. It's like really new thing. I was just like, oh no, this is actually, it makes complete sense. It's like if you're really into some particular niche, now you have TV for that niche. Okay, we didn't have to go through a network. We didn't have to, it's kind of the oldest claim about the internet of all time, right? It's like we're going to just get, this particular thing is going to broadcast to you. I'm like, I mean, but for a very particular type of like sort of structure of content, right? Where you have like the celebrity who in this
Yeah.
case maybe like, cooking Korean food. It's like if you're really into cooking Korean food in LA and you want to get 1 million followers, like there's probably, I don't know, 10 slots for that. And right now
Yeah.
there's only like 3 or 4 of them are filled. So that's awesome if you want to be that type of celebrity. But it's actually completely different. It's like unrelated to the last thing I was talking about. It's just a totally different thing. They have nothing to do with each other.
No, it's like
Yeah, anyway.
it's a consumption network, really. Like it's, I mean, if you're a creator, you're a creator, but it's very much like what you're talking about. It's like it's one to many, it's parasocial,
Yeah.
it's but it's it's entertainment, which is
Yeah, it's
different
still
than like
fun. They're still
community.
good. Actually, part of it was like part of what I thought was interesting about TikTok is that there's tons of actually this is partially influenced by listening to NymphEd Alumni, which I think of as was a fantastic podcast, but B basically a podcast about TikTok. So I was like listening to NymphEd Alumni from time to time, being like, man, I'm too old for this shit, but maybe I need to understand TikTok. And they kept referencing things that seemed so niche and so specific. And when I finally went down the rabbit hole, I was like, it's kind of amazing. Like there's a beauty to it, but it's just it's a different thing. Yeah, it's all about distribution. It's all about basically giving distribution to anyone who wants to be a celebrity. And you can want to be the biggest celebrity, you can want to be a local celebrity, but it's basically just about celebrity. It's like
Yeah, I think
Andy
that like
Warhol
that's
invented TikTok.
I mean, like, do you feel like the way I've been feeling lately is like it feels even weird to say because for the last decade it's been like, whatever, attention is the most scarce resource on earth and blah 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 blah. And like it's like if you can capture attention, you're capturing something extremely valuable. And it does to me feel like that era is like ending, because attention actually seems fairly easy to get at this point. Like if you have if you're motivated, I guess I think that like you could probably like just make a plan to be one of those, sit in one of those 10 seats that you're talking about
Yeah.
and go do that. And there's like it's pretty standard. Like it's not really all that confusing to think about how you would go about doing that if that's what you're motivated to do.
Yeah,
Now,
that's an
like
interesting
the
framing.
return on it though, I think is all-time lows because before, like if you were the guy on Instagram who was like into Korean food or something, like there it was sort of king making for a while, like in that world. And there was like influencer deals where you made money and you would do like, sponsored posts and stuff like that. And it feels like a lot of that market, I don't know, maybe I'm totally wrong. It's all happening on TikTok. But it does feel like there's something more valuable. Like communities produce information in a different way. Like we're not producing
Well,
content.
yeah,
The community
you're talking
actually
about
like,
something. Yeah, it's not. It's like so. It's interesting to frame it as like, okay, yeah, we have really good. Basically like the last 15 years or something, or 20 years of technology are basically all about targeting, right? They're about content
yeah,
delivery and targeting. We're really good at tracking users across every possible platform, knowing exactly who they are, how to get them information that hopefully they'll spend money on or at least time on, right? And there's this weird, like, I always actually thought that like, Google makes sense as an advertising company. It makes perfect sense, right? I'm looking for something and you can indeed, like in a kind of virtuous way, just put in front of me, hey, maybe you're looking for this, like let
right.
someone pay for, maybe you're looking for this. Um, Okay, sure, makes sense. And most of like kind of effectively like things that do better and better targeting, right? Because I am declaring my interests, declaring who to follow, and so on. Like those are basically target. They're going to target information to me, and so and they're yeah they're basic their primary resource is attention, and they know how to basically divide up all the attention in the world and get and just pump the most relevant content,
And
directly to
TikTok
that
is like
attention.
best at that, right? Like their algorithm is like hyper advanced at this.
It's
It's
so too.
It's good. It's interesting. It takes a while. That was part of what my friend was telling me. She's like, you got to spend like a couple weeks because it does take time, and it's true. It takes a little while. It wasn't. It's like at first I was like, yeah. At first I was like, this is not interesting to me. But yeah, it does learn. It's interesting. But yeah, it's getting content to you. So it's sure we have the ability to divide up and handle attention, but what we don't have is how to actually get people to feel connected. So going back to the Facebook analogy, I always when they're like, "Oh, what was it? We make the world more open and connected," and I was just like, this is bullshit, man. Like, that is not true." Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that's like the thing that we're talking about. It's like, no, we actually severely lack tools for generating a feeling of like real connection. I think all of us also, maybe this is too personal, but are part of like this. There are many people in the world who actually didn't go through what I think all of us went through, which was like you kind of leave your community and you go and find and try and build another community, right? Which is
Yeah.
very, especially post COVID, everybody's like trying to figure out how to do that. Most people, grow up in a place, are fostered by the community institutions of that place, and they become a part of that community. That's a much
Mhm.
more, in some ways, normal and natural and less fraught thing.
Yes.
But regardless of whatever happened to you, like I think that like there is like a missing piece of technology there, right? Which is like, well, just how do you stay connected to people? How do you generate a sense of connection with those people that actually is like rewarding in the same way that you would feel rewarded by spending time with someone, where you don't have that sense of like, is this real or not real? Like, do I have ownership over this? Will this last for a long time, et cetera? And we
Yes.
only have these like, in some ways, Apple might be the only company that like really, really, truly cares about that, although they still have real problems like being able to make that their sole sort of business objective, I think. But other than that, like, I mean, none of these companies care about that. Not really. It's like
No.
incidental. It does nothing.
Let's
Yeah, it's
see.
not.
Yeah, I mean, it's all if you look at how they make their money, I mean, you can factor in pretty quickly like why they care about it and to the extent of which they care about it, which is like as much as they have to make sure they can still advertise to you
Yeah,
and keep you
but
coming
that's
back.
because they're just like attention companies, right? Like that,
Right.
that's what I was saying. Like that's the thing you were saying, I think, or that's how I was viewing that. That feels like I never really thought about it that way. Like their primary thing is to capture as much attention as possible, whereas companies that are truly actually about connection don't care about how much. I used to say like I'm like, and we've never actually done this, but maybe we should do this. It's like we should never be a company that measures basically like daily active users. Like we should be
Right.
measuring like quarterly active users or something like that. Because if you're a company that
Sure.
cares about like your primary objective is we create high quality connections between people. It's like, well, how do you maintain a high quality connection? I mean, I have like dear friends I talk to every couple months. Like,
Yeah.
but if you owned the channel for that, like, I mean, that's really valuable, like someone should make that a good experience, right? Like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
for
not
the
something.
for the FWB app so far, the only metric I care about is actually retention rates, right? Like how often are
Sure.
people coming back over the course of the
Yeah.
week, over the course of a month, over the course of a quarter? Because what matters to me when I think about what we're optimizing for is, are you engaged enough to want to return here and like share ideas and share thoughts and post content and RSVP to an event, et cetera? And it's a lot less insane of an approach than expecting people to like spend a certain amount of time in the app every day or on network every day, or like the number of people who are using it every day, because those things are by nature going to fluctuate massively regardless of the size of what you're building, whether it's a small thing or something massive. It's like incentivizing all of the wrong behavior basically.
Yeah. I mean, the hard part, obviously, right, is how do you harmonize that with, like, how do you make that a business, basically? Like, not you, but anyone. Like, and I think there are many, sometimes I think that, like, many of there were a lot of the Web 2 failures were, I think, people who came from the sort of the right place. Like they cared about these things, but they just ultimately couldn't figure out how to make it into a business, like
Mhm.
make the like quality of connection into a business. It's extremely hard to do. But I think it's getting easier because people feel burned by, like, so burned by the existing tool set. All
I think that
right, should we
that's
call it?
like,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, but I'm definitely, I'm with you there. I think that there's, yeah, I think information is a big part of it. I think communities like ability, like a community's ability to process information into real sort of ideology, or like real sort of like a like to make the world fit with their idea, is like a daily effort, right? Like you're reinterpreting stuff. Like I think I was talking to somebody else, but like if you're using like religious sort of sects or like communities, like the Catholic Church, like if aliens come out and they like disclose like, oh cool, right, yeah, like ETs exist, we've got a bunch of crafts, stuff like that. I was thinking about it. I'm like, okay, like the Bible is like whatever, it's their like rules and regulations, their terms of service, their mission statement, manifesto, or whatever. Like, a lot of what religion is contextualized in the world. Like there's not much in the Bible that's like a direct mapping to today or whatever, but like, there's a big business in making sure that everyone like checks in once a week to make sure that like what they're doing lines up with this. Like the two possibilities for all the weird shit in the Bible are like, oh, they found psychedelics or there used to be aliens. It's like there's like some stuff like that. I could easily see the Catholic Church loving the fact that there's like ET disclosure because it gives them a chance to sort of like turn into ancient aliens, right? Like there's this entire like new thing now that the church could rope in or like reinterpret as part of their past, and it probably actually wouldn't be as scary as people think.
I mean, Dex, the Vatican would love to stop hiding all of the crafts that they've recovered.
but like but like in terms of like in terms of a regular community, like that's sort of like communities exist for this. FWB exists for this. You see it in our traffic. Like anytime anything happens in X, Y, or Z sort of domains, people flood into FWB who are in there to like talk about it and make sense of it and figure out like what the fuck
Oh,
they're supposed to do with this information.
for a
And
second, I
so
thought
like
you're like FWB exists to find
aliens, alien crowds, ET crowds.
I mean, what's wild is like I guarantee that if we started a channel that was all about UAPs, it would fill with tons of people wanting to talk about UFO. Like it'd be a thing
Yeah.
immediately. That's the one thing that's so remarkable, and it's I see it on Urbit too. It's just like whatever random subject you're looking to talk to people about, those people are here, and for some reason we've all found a way to each other. And quite frankly, I think it's almost like a eternal process. Like these people kind of like find themselves in these spaces again and again. I've seen it in terms of like who I keep finding in these spaces.
Yep.
And I think what's missing, and I think what we're all reaching for, is like there probably should be a way to capture all that energy and make it something that people can use, not just for the 5 to 10 years that a typical software platform exists.
Yeah. I mean, tell me about it, man.
I mean, like that's essentially exit, though, right? That's what we're talking about. Like, is like that's I mean, we've kind of danced around it a couple times, but like the idea of exit of a community being an important like mechanism of the platform that you're on. Like leaving a community is hard, and leaving behind like sort of like status, relationships, connections, information, all of these different things come with it. And like that's what I see like a sort of future, kind of a brighter future looking like, is the ability to sort of take everything with you, like to not necessarily to like not these like everything on chain worlds or whatever, where like every post I make to a social network is written to Ethereum or something, but like the idea that like the value and the connections that I've developed aren't just left somewhere because I've chosen to leave this one group.
Yeah.
And or the idea of forking and stuff like that. And that's like, that's the Web3 stuff that I really like. I like the idea that we have, like, if everyone forgets about friends with benefits, if everyone's done with it at the end of the year and they whatever forget about their tokens. To your original point, Galen, the token will exist forever, right? Like people could pick it back up in 20 years and decide like, this was the homebrew computer club of the 2020s, and we're going to start, the 2040s FWB, and we're using their token. You can go pick it up and craft the same things or whatever you wanted to do. Like communities as as their own sort of protocol, like makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't think there's any tools yet available for like the cleanest version of that allow you to sort of like, I don't know, like an
What are you
evergreen
talking
version
about?
of a community
That's
structure.
our business.
Well,
What do
that's
you
what,
mean? That's
well,
our
right.
whole business.
What I'm saying is like, I guess like, yeah, like
No, I
seeing,
understand. Yeah.
does Urbit have like is there an exit sort of like, I've never looked too
Well, there's two
deeply
things.
into
I
it, but
mean,
there's no like,
well, first of all, like you can like the way we think about it has always been like we should build things that could outlive us, and it wouldn't like it could easily be picked up by somebody. Like the company could die, and like everything could go on, right? Obviously, with hosting, it's like a little bit different. Like you gotta go run the node or something, I guess. But like you can do that. It's pretty easy to do. Um, yeah, I mean, an Urbit node is like, I mean, you can there are tools to like dump data out of a group and move into another group, but obviously, I mean, landscape will turn into all kinds of things, and yeah, it's all just integers, right? Like that's the whole.
yeah,
I mean, we take this stuff pretty seriously, like in terms of like we're just like, yeah, it's just a bunch of data, like, and it should live forever, basically. I mean, as much as like any technology lives forever, right? I mean, I've
right.
bought old Apple hardware on eBay and played with it. And yeah, like it still works, but it's like, look, everything ages. Like it's gonna age to some extent, and that's okay. You just want there to be you want to be able to can I boot up my Facebook account from 2000 whatever? Like no, that's
Right.
actually completely impossible. And certainly like I mean I don't know like what's pick a startup that went out of business that you loved. Like you're definitely that's not coming back.
Right. Like
And
Vine, for instance, like you can't just go post a Vine right now.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, a big part of like we think about it like, okay, look, like Urbit's Urbit, like there's a whole, that's think of it like Linux, and then we build the tools on top of that that should continue to exist if we were to disappear. And of course, Urbit is built to last. But of course, like the way that the whole model works, it's like, well, if all of FWB ran on Urbit and you guys also used whatever a bolt on, like you are using landscape, using groups, like obviously, like we have like we're not exactly Discord, but there are like some overlap there. Like you could use it for
Hmm.
group communication, and you guys build, I don't know, like yeah, you build events. So you build a standalone app that does events that like every FWB member can install. Well, they're all just running that app. Like it's all running on their individual nodes. The
Right.
data is on those nodes. So either the developer gets hit by a bus or we go out of it. It doesn't matter. Like the software is still running. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
we try and go kind of to the most extreme here, right? It's like not only do the individuals retain the data that they created, but they actually run the software. So like the software itself is self-contained. And so to, make it the concrete, the stuff that's pretty squishy or whatever. It's like, yeah, the idea is like the community actually just fully and completely owns their tools and can do whatever they want with them, just totally irrespective of any third party, like whether it be the developer of some component or like someone running the thing for you, whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, we'll see if we can be like, can we be the global standard computing platform? We'll see.
I mean,
But
it's like at a certain point though, like yeah, I mean, I think in some of our early conversations we were talking a lot like about music, like hardware gear, like modular synthesizers and stuff like that, and like
yeah,
and even like trackers and stuff. Like I just got this fuck, who makes this? What's it called? Isla S2400. It's like a clone of the EMU SP1200 sampler, which is like
hmm
like late 80s, early 90s hip hop sampler that was used by everyone. The cool thing about it is like this is a new piece of technology or a new piece of hardware. It just came out like a year ago, but I can go on forums and like grab old files for the SP1200 and load them in here because it's backwards compatible and it's like the same. They just honor the same file type, and trackers do the same thing where you can just pick up like these drum and bass files like off of a Usenet server or whatever that are like a couple kilobytes because it was the 90s, using like sound fonts and weird shit like that, and they all load perfectly. And you just like all of a sudden can open someone's project up from like 1994, and it's like right there in front of you, and you can mess around with it and edit it. And it's like those like that's how Urbit feels to me. It's just like, and then if I didn't like something inside of this, I could fucking unscrew it and I could change the filters in it. I could change the capacitors in it if I wanted to make it sound different. And like that,
yeah.
like
I mean,
the hardware world, it respects a lot of this stuff, and it was a given for a long time. And I feel like the digital world, it's like the lack of that is hasn't been fully realized or like paid attention to.
I mean, people just didn't figure it out. Like most of the physical world is this way, right? So it's like buildings, electricity, water, like these physical infrastructure, down to like furniture across all scales is something that's like a super decentralized system. There are people all over the place who know how to work on these things. You can independently work on it. You can go, try and work on your own electrical or plumbing if you want to. You can figure out how to do it, or you can, probably hire someone to do it. And it's just like it's a complex system. Like it's an organism basically that maintains it. And it would feel really weird, like if all of that stuff was in any way totally central. Obviously, there are points of centralization. There are enormous, development companies. There are enormous like utility companies and so on. But like, actually, it's still reasonably kind of like in balance. It feels like
Yeah.
a complex system. And yeah, generally, I'd say like communications technology or like kind of like cloud-based communications technology. I mean, it's super young. It's so young, right?
Yeah.
Like building technology is like thousands of years old. I mean, even
Yep.
modern building technology is still, a lot of it is like a couple hundred years old, and it's like most basic. I mean, you're kind of like average timber frame house. It's like, I mean, we've been building houses like that for a long time. And so I think we just don't really know how to build software, like connected software. Like we have no idea. And all the technology that the internet runs on is basically like I mean, I guess like using my own argument against me, right? It's like, well, it's old enough, like it should be mature. But I would argue like, well, it's actually just built. It was built for something totally different, right? So like
Yeah.
Linux comes out of this like totally different lineage, which is effectively aimed mostly at like one person, one machine, as like an individual workstation. And so, is it the case that technology invented for a personal computer that sits on your desk is actually relevant for a world that is totally networked? Data centers are everywhere. Every device has like basically a cell connection in it. Like,
Right.
no, not really.
No.
And it's a totally different problem, and no one has really taken seriously, like, could you actually think about it anew? Obviously, that's like what we did, or like that's kind of the very much like in the DNA of Urbit, like was sort of like, all right, well, could you invent the PC from first principles today? Like our answer was yes, but it's hard and don't try to do it yourself. Or if you do, it's going to take a long time. It's just like a really hard problem, but it's not, and yeah, like there could be others like it, but certainly like technology, I'd say like personal computing technology on a network. We don't know what the fuck that is. No one knows what that is. Like people do not know what that is. Like completely have no, I mean, I think we kind of know, but
Yeah.
like, I mean, I think we know, but like also we like the proof is in actually being able to deliver fantastic software, which is like, I'm like, yeah, we're working on it. It's going pretty good. Like we'll be able to brag about it when it's massive.
Yeah.
I think at present it remains like an open question, really. But it's worth even getting people to see that is, I mean, in some ways not important, but definitely very difficult. Like for most
Yeah.
people, we live in this world where, yeah, everything seems to work. And like, yeah, it does work. And like, yeah, I open TikTok or whatever, and like it's really fast. But it's a different use case in a way, right? Like most of communications technology is like made for, yeah, as we've been discussing, right? It's just like made for totally different things. The like personal computing on a network, even it's like that doesn't exist. It does not exist. It doesn't exist as a user experience. The only thing we have to even think about that is basically like, well, what was the personal computer originally like? But it's a totally open territory. It's like completely open. Like there's so much that can be invented there. Like, I mean, everything we're talking about is like digital. Like, do people even know what the potential of like a digital community really is? I mean, some of them, like to me, like that's what's so fascinating. Are there any really interesting DAOs? I mean, you guys get a pass, whatever,
No,
but
go
no.
off, go off, go off.
But no, not really. I mean, no, I mean,
It's safe
kind of. I
space.
don't know. It's like I'm not
No,
trying to
not
talk
really.
shit, really.
No, the
It's like,
answer is no,
but
not
like,
really.
well, not like there are in
What,
this. Like,
what
I'm
would
excited.
constitute?
I'm excited people are experimenting, but it doesn't strike me
Yeah.
yet that like those experiments are like they're not like yet really working. It's just an indicator of the fact that like do we know like what it could look like for like an online community to sort of reach its full potential? Like, do we have kind of like the Catholic Church of the network? Like, no, like not even no, definitely was that Facebook. Like, come on, like no,
No.
you don't even know. Like, you have no idea. No one knows.
No, and
Galen,
I
what do
think
you
that I
think?
don't think you get to that place without incentives. Like there's no incentive to become that community at this point. There's personal incentives to become like the biggest influencer in X, Y, and Z, but there isn't necessarily like people don't see a route to like
I don't
like
know if
until
that's
there's a
that.
way for you to.
People just
Well, I just
want to
don't think
build.
there's
People care, but human institutions are built because out of love, like out of like genuine, like just the desire for connection and like living together and sort of figuring out how to be here or whatever, right? And that, I guess I'm just arguing that like people aren't really truly able to explore how to do that in a networked world because the tools we have to do it are stupid.
yeah,
Galen,
I agree.
what would constitute an interesting DAO? Like what do you think, or even what would an inkling of interesting look like to you?
That's a
Regardless
good
of
question.
what software or computing system that DAO is using, like what would you want that DAO to be able to do or accomplish to make it feel thrilling?
Okay, so like the idea that you have a community that owns assets, right? And then you have both algorithmic and non-algorithmic ways to manage those assets is like a very rich prompt to me.
Okay.
So one of the first things that I thought of that, like I grew up around a bunch of hippies in the middle of the woods, and there were plenty of people who were into like communal living. And I saw many different, from borderline wild, wild country stuff to like, just families like living together. And actually, I do think there are some, and obviously you can go, what's the Century of the Self or whatever. You can go watch Century of the Self and watch, some of the less successful ones or whatever. But obviously, human potential movement in California,
Mhm.
lots of really weird and terrible things, but actually some interesting ideas about like how do people live together at this scale that's like not quite a city. So that's a perfect use case of basically we also have to have a way to manage our assets and then even potentially like how do we pay our water bill in a way that is like basically potentially permissionless, right? So I got a bunch of families that live together or whatever, we share property. So we need to be able to have contracts that actually enshrine our sharing of that property, of that asset, of
Mhm.
the upside of that asset. We also pool our capital. So we need to be able to move our capital around to take care of our utilities, to take care of food, and so on and so forth. Doing that stuff in a digital system is way like is could potentially be so cool, right?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
see a couple. I've seen a couple. You see these smaller ones. They don't get a lot. I feel like people don't care as much about them. But like, was it like? I'm gonna DX DAO or something. There was this little. They were almost like a dev shop. So that I always thought was interesting, right? It's like it's just like a communal wallet, but they're actually doing work for a bunch of different
Yeah.
people, and you just pay them at an Ethereum address, and they figure out their own internal governance. That's like baby steps. But there's like a mature version of it that's like potentially so sort of wild, and I'm just like riffing,
Well,
man. I don't know. I feel like
I
there's a
mean,
ton of
that's
interesting stuff.
I've definitely like that's I've like I had like a series of essays that I wrote that I never put out called it was all about like basically like decentralized communities and likening them to the back to the land movement and
Yeah.
like monastery, sort of like aesthetic living in those situations. Whereas like basically like I actually think that the coolest I'll answer to Jose's question about like what would be an exciting DAO. Like I actually think that a DAO that's hyper specific. Like, I think there are things in this world that the world doesn't want to pay for, right? Like essentially, like churches exist despite, like large portions of the world not believing that they're correct and or that they should exist or, whatever it is. Every religion has, everybody else in the world who doesn't believe in it, who's not in it. You have like the thing a part like something I care about a lot is like, addressing sort of like the opioid epidemic in America in a like semi-compassionate, intelligent, rational way. And that's like the place, a zone that I like have, a deep connection to and a lot of friends in and like working and stuff and like do street medicine. Like one of my friends did street medicine in Chicago where they like, they have to drive around. They're helping people who are like far, far less than, like well off. Like these are people who like don't have homes. They don't have support systems or anything like that, and they drive a van around and supply them with like you know Narcan, they distribute, like they find people who are overdosing, like just on the street, 5 people a day, and they like literally go Narcan them and bring them back to life, and then give them like supplies and connections and free things. And it's all funded by like some like liberal sort of like philanthropical like people in Chicago who want a tax write-off. And that's like kind of a perfect system, right? There's people who like benefit from a tax write-off. They want to do something good with their money. They have too much of it. A little bit of their money is actually going to help these people in like X, Y, and Z ways that are like massive. And the world at large doesn't have to like agree or care enough to support this themselves through like tax dollars or whatever. I think that that's like a perfect thing for a DAO. I think that if you can find people who like in the sense where like monks will make beer or like caskets or like like there's all kinds of like little jobs that these like monasteries will like they make something because they have to make fucking money, but their lifestyle doesn't require decadence. They don't require like the amount of money that like 50 millennials are going to need. They just need a little bit to keep their system of living intact. And so I think that like those kind of things actually resonate a lot to me, because I don't think like I think when you meet people's needs in some ways, they stop caring about a lot of other things. And the idea or like the possibility that you could have people who do make like serious changes in their like local environments, in their own lives, in their cities, in their countries, hopefully at a large scale, has a lot to do with, to me, like setting up a system where it's possible to where they don't have to do this as like a passion project that kills them in addition to their day job. That like like I think that everything kind of can go the way of like a lot of things can go that way instead of the way of like you have to, like this is gonna like everyone who does this job at this DAO or whatever is gonna be making full-time salaries or whatever. Or like everyone who lives in our community is gonna be like ultimately rich and doing all this. Like when you live communally, you actually like most of those situations, everyone's going without something. And the reason why a lot of them fail is because people don't like doing the dishes, and a lot of that is like that was my big takeaway, because I was like, FWB was like somewhat of a commune at the start. It was like a bunch of people kind of like sharing assets, deciding what to do with assets. It was just the original vision was a lot more like that than I think it ended up becoming, which is the nature of decentralized governance. But I was looking into it, yeah, and like Drop City was like my favorite like first instance. Like it felt like we were building Drop City, this place where like people who were burned out with like hippie culture in the 60s, who were taking too much acid and didn't like come out the other side an enlightened person, like they went and built Drop City out in the fucking middle of nowhere in Colorado, and everyone slowly heard about it and moved out there, and they built structures and they tried to do it. And like if you read any of the books, it's like, yeah, like no one wanted to do the dishes 3 months in. And so like it's just what happens all the time. The people who want to do stuff and who are willing to break their backs doing something without incentives really end up getting burnt out, and then they have to leave and it all falls apart. And so that's where I think incentives actually come into play, is like being able to like provide enough for the people who are doing the work to where they can maintain that level of like engagement. And that's like something I don't think anyone's figured out, because a lot of it is like I guess like Galen, you would probably know best, but like people get like when you fully communalize things, people like it's almost like people take their hands off the wheel a little bit. And the incentives that normally exist for like this sort of sociopathic people who do show up and actually do like turn small things into big things, they don't exist for that type of person anymore. They exist for like people who aren't motivated by like personal gain. Is this resonating at all? Like when you remove the
Well, I think
incentives
you're
for
talking
like
about, I mean, I don't, this is, yeah, I think I'm a little like the successful communities I'm familiar with, which do like range in, I mean, I don't know, I guess I've been managed or been, I guess, lucky in some ways to be a part of successful ones of varying scales. It was really, their success was a function of the people's in like the intentions of the people involved, like I've seen what you're talking about where things can become destabilized, but I don't think it was a function of the tooling or the incentives. It's just like whether or not people were really fully signed up and communicative, and it's a human dynamic. It's a problem with the way that the thing worked. In that was my, at least my
that makes
observation.
sense.
And my like, I think the thing that I see, like when I think of the kind of super consumerized version of ultimate DAO tooling or whatever you want to call it. Hopefully, we never talk about DAOs ever again because it's such a bad name. But I'm just thinking about the fact that like, yeah, I think the basic innovation has to do with it's like ease of use. It's like, yeah, contracts are, no one writes contracts. So why can't you casually, like the ability to casually enshrine like, the movement of value is really powerful. Like that's really actually so powerful. Like to have that adjacent to software that, manages physical infrastructure, keeps you connected, like that's amazing. Like that's actually so, so powerful in a really very practical, ordinary like way that, you can imagine being integrated into sort of the form factor that we're familiar with in terms of like, yeah, sure, it's something you tap on or click on and type into, et cetera. But it allows you to formalize these things that we otherwise that basically either require people to be super high motivation, so sort of
Mhm.
ultimate bureaucrats, right? Where like I'm actually going to go get the contracts drawn up because I'm going to hire someone to do it and I'm going to write all the, it's like you just want to lower the barrier to being able to do that and letting people experiment with it in a way that's sort of more casual, I guess is how I've kind of like always thought about it. But those things aren't, yeah, they're not really a part of our, what software even like lets you kind of like, yeah, create rituals among a group of people, I mean, kinda, you like create recurring calendar events, but it's like that's a relic of like the
Yeah,
office, it's
that's
like,
a
Yeah.
container. It's a container. It's not the ritual itself. I think it's a really interesting point. It's like, I don't know, one of the things that I think about a lot is what it would look like to have software that facilitates interacting in ways that surface a lot of the things that we surface implicitly when we're interacting in communities, right, in person, right? There's a way in which that values, beliefs, behaviors, they just happen. You go to the place where the community gathers and you do things that feel okay to do, and you'll get signals, sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, that what you're doing is either good or bad or a little bit out of step. You adjust accordingly, and you participate in ways that don't require you to sit there and draw up a complicated contract, whether we're talking about an actual legal contract or a set of instructions or a product requirements document, all the things that have become kind of part and
yeah,
parcel of building software. But if you just have simple ways of getting people to interact that output sort of what's required to over time be able to say, like, this is how this works, this is how people get paid, this is how we pay other entities that we interact with, this is the time of day that we all share photos of our espresso, etc. Those things are super important, and figuring out how to turn that into something that isn't like onerous and difficult to set up is something that I think about like all the time.
well, yeah, I mean, the crux problem here to me, and the way I've always thought about this, and part why I've worked on, Urbit and Tlon for so long, is basically like you have to lower the cost, and I think like crypto actually works on a different, like it's a natural complement to what Ethereum does basically, but you have to lower the cost of creating connected software like 1,000x. So for
Yeah.
someone to be able to build and distribute an application has to be an afternoon project. It cannot be a company building project. And so that's the whole point of building new infrastructure. You're like, all right, look, well, what do we have the infrastructure? Everyone runs their own instances. And then when you're building software, you're just building a little bit of logic and a little bit of UI. And ideally, you pull that UI together. And then, ideally, if, blockchains are actually, performant and have good throughput and easy interfaces or whatever, like that thing can actually, let you, create whatever, if this, then that for, I don't know, like, it's like you can imagine like linear or Asana, right? But it's like, and actually go and, when these things are completed, and they could be useless rewards, but actually like just disperse these things that can be used in other
Yeah.
ways. And to me, it doesn't have to be about money. Like it can also just be about, you know, uh, enshrining like things that we acknowledge to be true in a way
Like
that is
make an
legible to a lot of
attestation.
people. Yeah, you're just saying like, hey, this actually happened, and
Yeah.
then you trade that for, yes, we appreciate you actually doing that, or you showed up and like you get
I
and
mean, have you seen the
and
Gnosis reality stuff? Like the Gnosis safes. You know the Gnosis people, right?
I do. I
A little
heard
bit.
about this when it was being built, but I haven't. Did they finish it? I
Yeah,
haven't
I
heard
mean
the.
the
Yeah.
reality stuff is it's our Zodiac. It's yeah, Zodiac is what it's called. Yeah,
Hmm.
that stuff is out. I've messed it a little bit, and I was really excited about it, and then realized like it's very real, and it's very much like it was something, it was just too real for FWB where I was like, okay, I don't think there's any instance where I can say if all these people do this, then trigger this smart contract to like send a bunch of money somewhere. So, but yeah, no, it's out. It's fun to look at. And they
Yeah, a lot
make
of
it
these things are
very
they're
like,
like at
yeah,
the edge of like you can just see it like, whatever, 5, 10 years out, like
yes,
becoming familiar, right? Like at this point it's still very technical basically. And you
yeah,
and it has a long road to become like fully familiar. But some of the pieces are there
Yeah.
kind of.
It's also still very oriented around the financial definition of value. And I think, Galen, what you were just
Totally.
talking
Yeah.
about that's so fascinating is like there are other things of value in a community that have nothing to do with financial value. And
Right.
those things are almost more important than the financial parts.
Yeah, like those
oh,
and
yeah,
those things generally in the real world get to be like repurposed, right? So it's like your whatever, you ran a half marathon, you got a shirt, but you get to wear the shirt and then you wear it somewhere else
yes,
and someone's like, "Oh, you're a runner." Like I don't know, whatever. Like there's just a lot of stuff like that that's never that's net that in the real world that's never self-contained, right? And right now all of that stuff is self-contained within whatever piece of software. And so, what happens when all of that stuff becomes unbundled and it's really, really quick to create software? It's like, well, maybe, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more, there are a lot of interesting things that can happen. And then but I think a lot of those things are like very familiar. They're like things we already do that you just kind of can't do in the digital world. That
it's
yeah,
like
have nothing to
yeah,
do with
it's
finance.
fungibility.
I
It's like you're like identity is like it's fairly fungible in the real world because we're all operating in the same spaces and stuff like that. So if like you ran a half marathon in San Francisco and you wear that shirt around San Francisco, like the chances are that people like, I mean, people are going to think something about you anyways, but could connect you to some other people. Whereas like on the like in what we're talking about in communities and stuff like that, like, sure, I can wear my FWB hoodie out in the world, but no one knows what the fuck it is, right? It's like it's not actually a thing like that. And that's even that's like the peak example because the real important stuff has no showing, and like there's no way to traverse your actual like your reputation, your identity, your
yeah, and
um
most of it's
yeah,
internal.
your yeah, it's all internal. And even I don't know, like I have weird feelings about that because I do feel like in some scenes, like you see people do this in real life when they're at a party with a lot of different people. Like at an urban party, everyone's probably like it's pretty stable. But if like you're at NFT NYC and you're at like a consensus event or something like that, like there are people who you I'm sure can watch like cycle through 5 different identities, like trying to find common ground with somebody else, being like, oh, were you at this? Oh, well, I was this. Were you this? And like, people who are adept at that are actually like very good at business and networking and stuff like that. And but yeah, that sort of fungibility of like reputation and identity doesn't exist in a natural way online or digitally or on chain at all. And the people's like a lot of people's attempts at it have felt like pretty boneheaded to me, where it's like I don't think there's any organization who can say that I'm good at something besides FW, like right, like the only people that know me
Oh,
are FWB.
no,
Like
I
my
understand.
community could attest something again to me, and if my community has enough cachet, that should mean something. But the idea of there being like a centralized credentialing sort of
Yeah, I
place or
don't think
company, that's super weird to
no
me.
one understands this like at all, as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned. Like, it's our I haven't. So like the thing that we tried to do was just to create an identity primitive that doesn't leak information about you, right? So it's just like a phone number. And then on top of that primitive, you can build reputation systems. But reputation is really complicated.
Hmm.
And I don't think it's there is like a single formalization. And like, yeah, like sure, there's some like kind of like technically, I've like seen proposals where I'm like, okay, like sure, like that's a reasonable like data structure, but like how do we to actually sort of build that into, actual uses of software such that I'm accumulating reputation in a way that feels meaningful to me. I just think no one understands this in a really worthwhile way. Like as far, like sure, and I mean, you can see sure there's like the Reddity versions, there's the likes and retweets and shit like that, but it's all really shallow and it doesn't. I think it's going to take a long time for people to actually. There's just a lot more sort of in situ implementation that has to happen, and experimentation basically to be able to start to quantify like reputation for an individual. But I guess the insight that I always thought was, and has been baked into Urbit forever, is just like, well, look, like the first thing you need is just one place to put it. So if you just put it all in one place, then you can start to figure out how to make it meaningful later. And we don't even have I mean, you don't have that. Like, how can you even
Yeah,
reason about reputation without that? Basically, you can't. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's how I feel. My only thoughts about it are that like communities can decide these things about their members, and like that's the only part that's the only form of it that I find meaningful. Is like I mean, whatever, you can earn a degree. Like if you want to get a certification, that's one thing, I guess. But like real reputation is very different than that, right? It's not like it doesn't mean anything if I'm able to like check the chain and see like, Galen has like a thumbs up that he can write Hoon or something. It's like sure, I guess, but like I don't know if I really believe that. I don't know who attested to this. I don't know who, like who's vouching for this.
What do you mean?
If I'm not in
LinkedIn
that
is the
community, and
ultimate, LinkedIn is the end all, is the final social network.
let's hope not
Uh,
for me. My LinkedIn is a very funny page. Um,
I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, it's a yeah. I just that stuff is hard, and I feel like a lot of people were saying they solved it a minute ago, and I was like, it was a hard couple months for me because I was like, no, you didn't.
I think it's a fascinating, I mean, there's a lot of, it's just like a rich area of experience. Yeah, I think reputation is internal to the community. And it's like internal to the individual, and you want to see what people experiment with it more aggressively. And yeah, more privately too. Yeah, a lot of the on-chain reputation stuff, like I was just like, I don't even know what
Uh,
you're talking about. It's like ridiculous. That makes no sense. Um, okay, you guys, this is the all-time longest Tlon TV ever.
oh wow,
We can
I
keep
I didn't
going
know.
too.
yeah. We should
But
we should
Jose's got stuff to do, dude.
no, I don't. I was frankly thinking about how a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about is stuff that I think that like there are ideas about how to not solve, mimic a more realistic and humanistic way of thinking about reputation in digital spaces that I'm really excited for us to explore with the FWB app. I think that like some of the very basic silly things we did, like creating a membership card where you put stickers on it and the stickers represent either things that you own or things that you got to participate in. Like there was a sticker for when the community got hacked early on. Lots of people like
That's awesome.
very proudly put the roll hack sticker on their membership
Yeah,
card to show that they were a part of the community when that happened. And I think there's just, I don't know, it's again so silly, but like I was at a show recently and watching like even like little kids interact over what patches they had on their jacket that someone else recognized.
Yeah, hell yeah.
That to me is like one of the most like primal ways of letting people experience what most people call reputation, but is more about like setting up signals that attract people to you that you are likely to have
yes.
good connections with, right? And so I think that lots of it gets turned into like a quantifiable system when I think what we need are just better tools for qualifying what kinds of signals we send out and how those signals are interpreted.
I
Yeah,
like that a lot. That's
yeah, there's so much good stuff there that's like totally under experimented with, I think. Like, yeah.
it's definitely stuff
We've
we're
been talking,
experimenting with. Not so much the systems that like hold it, but the like the softer social side of creating that kind of like creating reputation, creating like yeah, some form of reputation that feels correct and holistic, or at least like it's not trying to be holistic if it's not, kind of thing. Um,
yeah, I thought about doing it. You could do interesting things with the, so it's like, okay, all my data is on my Urbit. So my Urbit can mine all of the data that I create to kind of tag it, right? And then I could potentially actually like, I could encrypt each tag and then allow people to search for those like and basically do a like match only on encrypted without
yeah,
revealing like what are those tags, like can I find basically subgroups on the network,
uh,
like do you know what I'm saying, like with
it's like a
overlapping
zero
interests
knowledge
without,
way almost.
yeah, yeah, doing it ZK style would be even better. I had a friend who was a chef who used to joke about doing things TK style, uh, which, like Thomas Keller style or whatever.
Yeah,
So I guess that's the crypto equivalent. Um,
ZK stuff.
uh, but yeah, you could do it with, you could just like be doing proofs and verifications, which actually, if you guys, with this is a longer rabbit hole, but how much do you guys know about Zorp? Because the other interesting thing would be like if Urbit actually has really good throughput with proving and
Which we know about
verifying.
what?
So Zorp is like an Urbit-based company that is basically building a very, very fast ZK prover that runs as like an Urbit sidecar using NOC. So you can basically write a program and both prove and verify very, very quickly. I don't know how it's very early. The results are amazing. So you just whatever, truly idealized outcome is it's incredibly fast. So yeah, I can basically just create a proof of, I'm really into whatever cycling, boring example, which wouldn't necessarily, actually, I mean, you guys know this, but like, yeah, I'm like not on social media because I just hate the idea that I would ever be like, this is partially like growing up in a like localized surf town, but it's like, dude, don't talk about surfing. You know what I mean? Like when people post about surfing, it's like the one that grates me. Even saying this is like feels wrong. But like whenever anyone is like on any forum, especially like cool guy social media, will be like, oh, like anything about surf. I'm just like, dude, you don't talk about surfing. Like, what's wrong with you? Like,
yes, I know that feeling well. There's two or three things that I'm deeply like that about, and sometimes I wonder if I'm fucked up and I'm just dumb and everyone else is just like smarter than I am. And like, of course you share the things you like, and I'm like, no, you don't share them because
you don't talk about that. What are you talking about? Like that's the whole point. But like that ZK case is interesting, right? Like, would I I'll put up a proof of that fact, like that I've surfed a specific spot or something like that, like that someone could only verify if they had whatever you could imagine interesting crypto systems for doing that kind of matching. Like, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, no, that actually is cool. I like that stuff because I mean, like the idea that you like information being available but not identifiable is like a weird. It's like you can give people the shell of information, enough information that they can make some kind of decision or like they can form an opinion to some extent without giving them the actual information.
Well, you can
like
make meaningful connections, right? So the other thing I've thought about doing is like I would love it if you had better. Could I go to like basically, can you create a proof of the fact that you were at a location, right? So my Urbit stores all my biometric data in some future state, right? And so then can I just create a bunch of proofs of like I was at all these locations without leaking any of that data to anybody? And then people who I have some existing relationship with, could I also then only if they have been to that location or only if we are close by, will it then, can you reveal that fact, right? Like alternative is I leak all of my data to a third party all the time, like present solution, or like you have all these other interesting, basically permutations in a world where people can actually sort of compute on their own. But yeah, anyway, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I think there's a lot. You could obviously simplify this back to things that people are sort of comfortable, like putting, stickers. Stickers is a good simplification. This actually works really well.
Start super simple. Yeah.
All right, should we just do part 2?
Yeah, we'll do part 2 sometime. This Zorp.io, Jose, if you want to check out the ZK thing. The website's very cool, actually. I like their design a lot.
We should do part 2 at FWB Fest. You should come to Idlewild in early August.
I think I might be we'll talk about this later. Someone else was asking me about this, and I was like, I think I was supposed to be in Europe during that time. But yeah I mean,
double check. Part 2 on Tlon TV would be awesome. Assuming that
we gotta do it in person. I'll come see. I mean, if you come stay in California for a while, and we'll hang out while you're in California. We'll get together.
Let's do it.
Hell yeah.
I've never met Dex in person, so that'll be a wild experience. Honestly.
I'm moving a little closer to you soon too in a couple of weeks, so this should be easy.
Well, this is fun, guys. I'm glad we could make it happen.
Yes, likewise. It was awesome.
Thanks for doing it.
Anytime.
I'm gonna fade this out.
Okay.
There you go. Nice.